So, looking at the machete, you know, this was $20. So the saw was like $6, this little saw. And the other thing I was going to mention about this is if they don't have extra blades right there, you could buy a couple of them, take the blade out of one of them, and put this in the sock and the other blade, tape it up in a little cardboard sleeve or something, and drop it into your little sock too. It'll keep the blade with this, and then you have a spare blade that goes with this, and then you have a spare handle at home if you want. You can keep that in your truck or something in case you broke this one. But even in a pinch, this handle goes back in here. Even in a pinch, if you had to, you could wrap this with some material, or you could hold this shorter piece, and you'd still got a longer section to cut with that will cut much more effectively than the goofy thing on here. So you could kind of think outside the box a little bit if you're in a situation like that and what you have, improvise with. But for $6 or less with a coupon, this is a handy little tool to have, and it's pretty efficient at cutting firewood, processing wood. And in a pinch, you could cut through a wall with this. Now here's the other thing, is this I bought at Lowe's. A lot of these will have plastic handles, which I don't really like the plastic, but you could always replace them if you wanted to. The one thing I would do with this is, which I'm going to do, is you can kind of see the groove where the metal goes through the wood. I'm going to sand that down so it's flush, because this little spot for some people would cause a blister, and unless you're using it all the time, your hand isn't toughened to it. So a smart thing to throw some quality leather gloves in your pack also, and to keep in your bag. A lot of people don't think about that, because if it's a disaster survival situation and you're not used to using your hands are going to get torn up quick, and then there's a risk of getting infection and having other problems like that, or having to control bleeding, where it's easier to get infection because you can't clean the wound as well. So a good pair of decent leather gloves is a smart thing to have in your pack. And they don't take up much room, and then in other situations they can help keep your hands warm. The other thing I'm going to do with this is I'm going to drill another little hole up here that goes through the wood and through the metal, and I'm going to put a little barrel, like a ferrule, in there where I could run a piece of paracord and tie a loop on here. And I'll show you why in this video. So here's the thing with this is, this feels like a pretty good sheath. It feels pretty stiff, and you think it's like made out of plastic. I put a little grommet in here because I thought it's a nice way to be able to tie it to a pack, and I was going to put another grommet down here at the point. But when I put the grommet through, it punches through the material and sets a grommet at the same time with my grommet machine. And then I discovered that all this thing is made out of is 2 pieces of fabric with cardboard in between. So pretty flimsy stuff. So again, you kind of get what you pay for. They save the money on the sheath and put the money into the blade. And this particular machete is made in Brazil. Here, hopefully you can see the name of it. Not sure how to pronounce it. I'm not going to butcher it, trying to. But you might notice this little outline I put on here. And see, the 2 people that I'm kind of reshaping this for is, by cutting this, I'm saving some weight. It's still going to be really effective, but it's not going to be too long. With a longer machete, people are more apt to whack themselves and slip and hit themselves in the leg or something, or even in the arm. Smart thing to do when you're using a machete is put your other arm behind your back and tuck your thumb in your belt loop or something, so it keeps your arm out of the way. So if you miss a swing, you're not going to... People think it's funny, but people do stuff like that. I've seen people do things like that on the job because they're not thinking, and they're getting tired or fatigued, either from being up for long hours and working hard, or from the heat or extreme cold or weather conditions. So if you're looking at a disaster bag of some sort to keep in your vehicle in your home, or to take with you when you're traveling or something, depending on what you have in there, you got to think about the tools, how you're going to use them, so that you use them safely. So what I did is I already started shaping this one, and I tested it out. I batoned a couple chunks of mesquite wood, which is pretty hard, and it went through really well, worked really good. Um, this is kind of based off of the style of a Thai, of Condor's Thai up knife, which I have one, which is like almost a 1/4 inch thick and is a really nice chopper. These thinner machetes like this, these blades are made more for like saplings and vines and grass and shrubbery type things like that. You know, smaller diameter pieces of woody, pulpy material, and they'll go through it pretty easily. So if you live in like a jungle area, South America, or you live in maybe the east or northeast in the U.S., you know, where there's a lot of brush and shrub, a machete could be a handy tool. But if you live in a place where there's not as much of that, you might want a thicker machete that's made more for chopping, and those will actually work better for batoning, but they're going to weigh a little more. But kind of remember what we talked about. If you're out of shape, get in better shape, and that extra pound of weight, you'll be able to handle it. So here's what I did is I basically laid this out, cut this one out, saved this piece of material because I could make this into another smaller knife. So let's get to it, and I'll show you how I'm doing this. Well, now let's see how this goes. I'm just going to keep working on getting the same, I'm going to work on getting the same bevel all the way across here and then down around here. Just have to be careful. I don't want to do it this way because if it catches, it'll clip my blade. So I'll do it that way and then this way. So I'm going to finish that up. So as you can see, it's beginning to take shape. The first thing you want to do once you cut it is, like I had that little part I couldn't quite cut off, so I very carefully ground it down over here and then ground it down over here. And if you're grinding, you want to make sure that you're careful that you're not standing in line where if this thing catches is going to jam into your hand or jam into your body or anything. Just got to think ahead about the consequences of what you're doing and what could happen. Even if you think it's pretty remote, still play it safe. And then you notice I didn't grind like this because if this catches, it'll slam down. So I ground like this, so there's a less chance of that catching on me. With the disc, I don't have my table set up on here, but this spins this way. You always want to find out what direction the disc spins, and then you want to grind on this section that's going downward against your table. If I had my table mounted over, you always want to grind on the part that's going down. If I had my table over here, it just wedge. Whereas if I grind over here, it's going to keep flicking my thing up, whatever I'm grinding. So something else to be aware of. And you might not see it, but down over here, I have a little bucket, and I just slide this in here to wet this every so often because I want to keep this cool. I don't want this to get hot. Warm to the touch is okay. So after I grind a little bit, I dip it into the water, because you want your metal to just stay looking like this. If you start getting like a brown or gray or what looks like a hot spot, you're getting it too hot, and it's going to take the temper out of the blade. So then the metal's going to be softer, and it's not going to hold an edge as well and work as well. And then as you're grinding it, of course, you want to try to keep the same kind of bevel on both sides. This side I need to even out a little bit more so that both sides will be the same, and then your center line of your edge runs right down the center of your blade, especially when you have a bevel on both sides that you're grinding to sharpen it. There are different types of grinds. We're not going to get into that right now. For this machete, we just need this wedge shape. We don't want it too thin because I can get it a lot sharper that way, but for what it's used for, it'll be way more apt to chip and ruin my blade on me. So I don't need this super razor sharp or anything, though some people will. Just depends on really what you're using it for. Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of grinding, and I'll put my protective gear back on. I'll put my respirator on because I don't want to smell this dust and plug up my nose with it or get it into my lungs. I'll put my earmuffs on and my gloves, because all it takes is just one little nick on this and you'll have nasty rug burn from sandpaper, which takes a long time to heal and it really hurts. So I'll see you on the other side when I get this ground down. Okay, so I got this ground out pretty good. I'm going to finish it on my stone here. This is a nice Norton Indian combination oil stone. This is medium, this is fine. It's one of the best stones I've had. I have a couple smaller ones that are just like the size of your finger and a little bit longer that are just this medium, and it actually works really good. You can get a razor's edge on this on a knife without even using a finer one, and that's a lot of times what I'll carry in the field, and I'll just keep my knife touched up with that and it works awesome. Anyway, or if you are really particular, every time you get done using your knife, if you hit it on a fine stone, it'll stay razor sharp pretty readily. So I'm just going to put some 3-in-1 oil on this thing, smear it around. Start working on it. Got my barbell in the way here. And it'll be a bit of work to get this down. You want to keep the oil that's on there as it gets gritty with it forms kind of a paste of finer particles, and it actually helps you sharpen your blade and get an even better edge on it. There's a lot of different ways to sharpen. Some people like to go circular, some people like to draw. Right now I'm pushing this. I'll use a combination of things. A lot of times with an axe or a bigger thing you might actually move the stone, but it's kind of easier in a sense to hold the blade and move the blade because I know where the blade is and my hands are moving with it, where if I take a stone and I start polishing it, it's very easy to bump a knuckle on that blade and cut your knuckle wide open. I've done it myself. I've seen more than one person. That's why I generally like my stone stationary, and I'll sharpen and move the blade. The other thing is the angle. You know, it depends on what you're sharpening. A chisel, a machete, hatchet, a knife, depending on what the knife's being used for, you'll have a slightly different bevel to the edge that you're sharpening. And some people like to use, I've seen a lot of things now, are like the Landskis with the ceramic sticks and stuff, and I have a couple of those things that I got. One someone gave me, the other was really cheap. I thought I'd try it, and I consider them pieces of junk. I don't like them. I'd rather go old school and use a stone, and that's what I keep in my pack. Is I have a couple of the medium and fine stones, just a smaller one, and that's what I use. And I like it, but I've been sharpening knives for years, since I was a boy, and got my first Camp King pocket knife from my dad, which I still have. So there you go. If you need a particular angle and you're that anal about it, fine. You can get things that have guides on them and all this stuff, but you know, initially maybe it helps to learn how to sharpen, but once you get the hang of it, it's just getting the right bevel and being consistent with it. And a lot of times I've found that with like bigger, medium or bigger size knives, I end up finding that I end up kind of grinding it myself with either a coarse and a medium stone, or like with a nice file, and getting the angle on that I want, and then it's easier for me to sharpen and keep sharp. So sometimes the angle that it comes with from a shop or a store might not work that well for you, and you're having difficulty sharpening it. Well, experiment with a couple different angles and grinds on it, and you'll find one that works better for you. So I'm going to go ahead and sharpen this up more and get this smooth and consistent along this edge a lot better than it is from just sanding it. You can do this on the belt sander too if you have progressively finer grits, but if you're not careful, it's easy to overheat the blade unless you have experience with it. And this is the way I've always done it, so this is the way I'm going to do it. Okay, I don't know if you can see this or not, but I haven't sharpened my blade yet on the fine. I've just done the medium side of my stone, and I've hit it maybe 20 times. It's still not the greatest, consistent edge all the way. On a knife, I definitely look for a lot more consistent edge, the same bevel all the way around on both sides. You want to do the same amount on both sides so you keep your edge centered down the blade and it doesn't wander or drift off to one side more than the other. Keep your angle consistent on both sides. It just takes experiment and practice with it. If you get a little softer bladed knife, is a good way to learn, because harder blades take a lot more to sharpen, though generally they'll hold their edge a lot longer. And that's one of the things I found with the Ontario knives, like the old hickory, that I've inherited a few from my parents, and they're good knives. They're high carbon, but they'll rust if you don't keep them oiled and take care of them. The thing is the grind on them a lot of times is kind of rounded. It's kind of almost like convex. So if you get one of those, you might want to regrind it yourself till you get a more consistent angle that you like, and then practice sharpening it and using it. And this edge will become more consistent as I continue to sharpen it over the years as it's being used. Or it'll just, if my friends don't ever use it, then until they need it, it'll be good until they need it. So I'm just going to sharpen it here a little bit. And sometimes if there's an area you need to hit it more, you can hit it more in that area to even it out. So generally I try to do the same amount of strokes on both sides. And then check for a burr. It's got a little burr on this side because I sharpen this side. It pushes the metal over, it creates a little burr. So I can just lightly take that burr off. Then there shouldn't be a burr on either side. You'll feel it kind of drag a little bit. There's still a little bit there. And that's better. Now check the other side, real slight. And this is where a good strope, a leather strope, will work. You can take that little burr off. It's pretty good for what it is. Yeah. See? Took off a little bit of hair. So it's pretty close to being razor sharp. So for what it is, I think that's plenty good enough. All right, well, get on to the next step. And I'd like to show you a lot more of this stuff as I'm going along. That's why I'm having to break it up because it's so hot out here. My camera and my phone, which controls my camera, overheats and then it'll shut off on me. So kind of have to break up some of the stuff that I'm doing and do it on the side and then come back to it. Okay, so I got one of my handles done. You can take a look at it here. I sanded this down so it's even with the metal. Maybe you can see that. And then I put my little rivet in here, my little ferrule, whatever you want to call it. And that way I can run a little thong through here and tie it off. And I'm going to show you how I'm going to do that in just a minute. But first off, in order to do that, is you need to drill your handle. And this metal is pretty hard. I'm guessing it's like 440 stainless or something to that effect. So you need some high quality drill bits in order to drill through it. I didn't have the best drill bits, so I ruined several of them, but I can resharpen them. And then what I did is I used my little Dremel tool and this little chainsaw file to finish filing the hole out. This hole, a little chinker came out of the wood, but nothing major for what it is. I mean, it's $20. I'm doing this all by hand. So then what I did is I have some brass here. I don't know, this was like $6 or something, and I cut a little chunk off. So my next step is generally when people are working with knives is they'll put epoxy on here. So let's take a look at this. So I got my holes drilled in my handle. This was off slightly and it chingered that out a little bit, but I'm not going to worry about it. And generally people will put a little epoxy on here down in the hole and run this through here. I'm just going to kind of pressure fit it because it goes into this metal pretty snug. So I'll work that through there, tap it with a hammer. Then I'll run it through a little bit more. So what you want is you want this sticking out a certain amount, maybe 30 seconds or so, and then you're going to flare it. This is sticking out a little too far, so I'll grab a file and I'll just file it down carefully. And I'll get it down to the length I want. Of course, if you're working on a really nice handle and everything, you're going to want to file this, somewhere where you're not going to hurt your handle. You can tape it up, mask it up so you don't damage it, or slide that back out and cut it to size, file it. But I think I'm pretty good there. Give a little tap so it's pretty even on both sides. And then all I'm going to do is, there's a lot of different ways to flare these out. Sometimes people will use ball bearings that are bigger than a hole, and I don't have any that would work. And you can put a ball bearing on both sides of this, and then just put a little piece of tape over it, kind of hold it, and put it in a vise and crunch it, and it'll flare these both nicely. Other people will use like pan head screws, and they'll make their own little tools and stuff to do it. And people will even use like a center punch. This one's pretty beat. This one's in better shape. So that's all I'm going to do. I'm just going to take one, set it up underneath here, kind of balance this, put this other one on top, kind of line them up best I can, and give it some taps. Try to flare it out a little bit. Generally what happens too is one side will want to flare better than the other. I don't know why that is. It just always seems to kind of work that way. Nice thing about using a hammer and some type of flaring tool though is you can get more of a feel than a vise, and you can kind of see what you're doing more readily. So because you don't want to split your handle, that's the other issue. And a lot of times what guys will do before they insert this and flare it is they'll actually countersink this a little bit in the wood, so when this flares it'll sit nice and flush. And these are below the surface, but So that's another thing that you can do. I'm not majorly concerned about that at this point. I'm just trying to get these flared out a little better. Starting to look a little better there. A little better here. Okay. There, it's not looking too bad. And then what I'm going to do is, let's see, I have this little metal rod, and I'm going to set this on top of it and just kind of flatten it out a little bit more. So this should cause it to flare out even more. Not too bad. There. That one's pretty nice. If I countersunk it, it'd be below the surface a little bit. It sticks up a little bit above it, but it's pretty smooth. Doesn't catch on your finger. This is the other one I did. That one's actually even nicer. Just needs to be countersunk a little better. So I'll give it a little whack here. Countersink it a little more. Then I'll come back over on this side, kind of egg this side out a little bit more. There you go, not too bad. So the only other thing I have to do with this one is, this one's pretty close, but I'm going to sand the handle down a little bit because of this groove. And then I'll put the thong on there. Okay, so I'm just using 550 cord, paracord. You have to watch because some places will advertise that that's what they're selling, but it's actually not 550 cord. So make sure you're getting the real deal. You can use a leather strap or whatever you want in here. And how I determine how long this needs to be. So just so you got that, run your thong through there, grab your handle, grab both pieces, come around the back of your hand, stick your thumb up, and run that on both sides of your thumb. And then come down here, pinch it somewhere around here, set your handle down, mark this piece of chalk or something, and that's where I want my knot to be approximately. So I'm just going to tie it, try to adjust it. I'm not going to do anything super fancy. If you have a longer piece of material, you can run a little figure-8 knot in there. It works really nice. So I'm just going to kind of cinch this up, and then you can see my chalk is on the other side of my knot, which is pretty much where I want it. So I need to adjust my knot a little bit, and I don't need to undo this entirely to do it. You can see one of my chalk marks is down here and the other one's up here, so I got to get the knot down here more. So to do that, I'm just going to loosen it up a little bit. And then work these through here, pull them through a little bit, and then cinch my knot back up and lock it in pretty good, and then I'll test it. So here's where a lot of people make a mistake. They don't even know what this is for. They think it's just like a cool thing, or maybe they hang their knife or machete on something, or they think it's, you put your hand through it, so as you're using it, you won't lose your knife, and they might do other things and leave it dangling, which is dumb, because if you fall or something happens, you can get cut with it. So I don't ever do that. If I'm not using my knife, it goes back in my sheath. And if it's an axe or a machete and I'm using it a lot, I might stick it in a piece of wood, carefully, or lean it against a tree where I won't forget it. So anyway, what is the real purpose of this? Well, the way to use it is, there was a reason why I had that cord wrapped around here and then around my thumb. Because what you do is you simply have the back of your handle facing toward the center line of your body, facing toward the other side of whatever hand you're going to be using, opposite. So you put your hand with your thumb up, basically. It doesn't matter whether you're right-handed or left-handed. If I'm right-handed, I turn my palm up, or supinate my hand, knuckles facing down, palm up, so my thumb has to be pointing out away from my body, and this just simply hangs on here. And the flat of the handle is here, so as I roll my hand around, this grabs the handle, and now this is locked in. Can't slide off. So even if my grip is kind of loose and I can whack and I don't have to have a death grip on it, I'm not going to lose this, and I have better control of it. That's the purpose of a thong and a strap on the blade, how to do it, how to adjust it. So each individual person, their hand might be a little bit different size, so you just adjust it to your hand, and this makes this much more secure, much safer to use. And I don't do stuff with this hanging off my hand like this. It's just idiotic. Good way to get cut, or maybe even inadvertently lose your tool. So there you go. And if you're left-handed, you simply do the opposite. Supinate your hand, thumb pointing away from you, drop that on there, the back of the blade faces toward your body, you roll your hand around and grab it, and you're good to go. Really simple to remember. So, right-handed or left-handed, that's how you do it. Once you've gotten used to handling it and using this in this way, you don't have to set up every time like this. So once you get used to doing this, and it becomes familiar to you, and this is what you do every time you use it, and you don't just leave this thing hanging around, because if you have this on here and it's just hanging and you start chopping on something, this might catch on something. It might catch on your sheath if you've got another knife, or if you have something else hanging off your belt, or it might catch on a branch or something when you're chopping. So having this just dangle isn't a good idea. If you're not going to use it, you're better off removing it completely. So you need to get in the habit of using it every single time you use your machete. And after a while, you're just going to know that this is the way you do it. So come on, whiskey. So when you get to that point where you're more comfortable with it, you don't have to set up every time like this to use it. Your machete could be stuck in a piece of wood, or maybe you laid it on a stump or something, and when you pick it up, you could just simply stick your thumb through the loop, and you know that all you have to do is pass it around the back of your hand and grab your machete, and you're good to go. If I had my machete in a sheath and it was hanging here, or maybe off my hip, the same thing, is I know all I have to do is stick the thumb in here, and then I just whip my hand around quickly and grab the handle. And if I had it hanging on a belt loop here, the same thing. Even before I pull it out, I can stick my thumb in here, whip my hand around, grab the machete, and pull it out. And then I'm all set and ready to go. So once you get used to doing this, you'll just start automatically doing it. If every time you use your machete, whip your hand around there and get it set. And then it's going to be really easy for you to do. And you're not even going to think about it after a while. So that's just a key point. If you have a knife or a machete with a thong on it like this, and you're going to chop with it, either use it every single time or remove it. And that way it's not going to snag on something. Even if I was batoning wood, of course, with the other hand, it's not as big a thing. But generally, if you're right-handed, your baton with holding onto the blade, the handle with your left hand, and you'll hit with your other piece of wood with the right hand. And if you're left-handed, you usually do it the opposite way. So then I would say you don't have to worry about using this. But for anything else you're using this for, make sure you use this. It serves a purpose. It's a protection. That way you're not going to lose your grip, and that way it's not hanging or it's going to snag on anything. So, this is Walter. I hope you enjoyed watching this. Hope you learned a few things. Maybe you got some better ideas. Maybe it'll spark something in your own mind and an easier or better way to do things, which is awesome. That's the whole purpose of doing this, is just to teach people things that I know, what I'm using, how I do it, and might spark something in your own mind and own creativity to come up with something better. Or maybe you don't have the tools that I have, but you'll still figure out a way, depending on what you're doing. So, that's how I made a little machete. A little bit better tool for the people that I made this for. I'll make a sheath in my next video, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that. So stay tuned. Please subscribe. Please give me a thumbs up below, a like if you enjoyed this or learned anything, and please share it with your friends. And hopefully I'll see you next week. I was trying to get everything done on Wednesdays, every Wednesday, but it's very difficult. I got so many projects going on here. My wife's very ill. She's been on disability for like 3 years. She's pretty much bedridden, so I'm her caretaker, and I'm doing all these other things, so I'm trying to get things going though, so I'll keep you updated as things move along. Hope to see you next week.